Two black twins died on the same day. Everyone thought it was a tragic coincidence, until a video they never got to show when they were alive was played at the funeral. Subscribe and tell me in the comments what city you're from. The morning air hung heavy with heat, even though the sun hadn't yet broken past the buildings that hemmed in the neighborhood like concrete walls. Daniela Robinson sipped her lukewarm coffee from a paper cup and glanced at the clock on the wall. 6:41 a.m. She had exactly 19 minutes before she had to leave for the hospital. The twins were still asleep upstairs. For now, the house was quiet, peaceful, deceptively so. Her home, a small two-bedroom unit in a worn-out housing complex on the east side of Montgomery, Alabama, bore the marks of care and struggle. The carpets were frayed, the paint chipped around the door frames, and the kitchen light flickered every few seconds. But it was clean, organized, lived in. The couch had faded where she and her children, Talia and Jaden, sat together watching movies. The family photo above the mantel, one of the last taken before her husband was deployed overseas, showed a younger Daniela beaming with hope, holding her infant twins on each arm. She hadn't smiled like that in a long time. Upstairs, Talia stirred first. She was always the first to wake, always eager to get ahead of the day. At 13, she already moved with the assertiveness of someone who didn't trust the world to be fair, so she decided to challenge it. Talia wanted to be a lawyer, a civil rights attorney, like the one she saw on the news, defending people who looked like her and lived in places like this. Her twin brother, Jaden, was different, quieter. He slept with his face buried under two pillows, immune to the alarms she set. He didn't speak much at school and rarely brought friends home, but he had a camera, a small beat-up Canon his uncle had given him the year before. Jaden had taught himself to use it with the dedication of a craftsman. He filmed everything: cracks in sidewalks, the glint of light off broken glass, the soft movement of tree branches outside their window, and, more recently, things he didn't talk about. They were twins, born 3 minutes apart, same womb, same home, same school. Yet over the years they had grown into parallel selves, close but never quite overlapping. Talia's confidence was rooted in confrontation, Jaden's in observation. He was the kind of boy who noticed what people tried not to show. At the breakfast table, Talia sat upright, scrolling through her notes for an upcoming presentation. It was part of her school's Youth Voice program, a citywide initiative where top students were selected to present civic research in front of a local government panel. Talia had been chosen to represent her school with a project titled Invisible Lines: Institutional Bias in Education. She had interviewed classmates, teachers, and community members, but what she really wanted was something more: real evidence. That's where Jaden came in. He hadn't agreed to help, not explicitly, but Talia had seen the clips, short, grainy, sometimes blurry, on his editing screen when she walked past his room. Videos of hallway altercations, security officers using rough language with students, a white teacher raising her voice at a black boy for something as small as a hoodie. Jaden never published these clips. They were saved on a hard drive, and Talia had noticed he guarded it like a secret. "You don't know what you're asking for," he had muttered one night when she begged to use one for her project. "It's not school stuff, it's bigger." Daniela, unaware of the private tension building between her children, kept her eyes on the immediate, getting to work on time, keeping the lights on and making sure there was dinner on the table. She worked nights in the emergency room at Jackson Hospital, pulling 12-hour shifts, coming home with aching feet and dry eyes. She trusted her children. They were responsible. independent. She thought their quietness was just teenage moodiness, not the weight of something neither of them had yet put into words. The school they attended, Bishop Freeman Charter Academy, was prestigious by local standards: uniforms, test prep, alumni lists. But as one of the few black families whose children attended on scholarship, the Robinsons stood out. Teachers often described Talia as strong-willed and Jaden as withdrawn. Both terms, Daniela knew, were code. There were things the staff didn't say out loud, but said all the same. When Talia voiced concerns in class, she was labeled disruptive. When Jaden asked to film a school event, he was met with suspicion. And when Daniela once confronted the principal about the way a substitute teacher treated her children, she was told perhaps her kids were better suited to a different learning environment. Still, she persisted. They all did. In the early afternoons, after school, Jaden would retreat to the public library computer lab, editing clips on old software, uploading select videos to an anonymous TikTok account called Street Frames. His following was modest, just under 3,000, but the engagement was strong. He never showed faces, never used names, but the content was unmistakably local. In one clip, a police cruiser parked across from the neighborhood playground. In another, two officers walking into the housing complex with their hands already near their belts. The tone of the videos wasn't loud or angry. It was steady, silent, observational. The tagline on each one read simply, "Look closer." At home, Jaden became more guarded. He started locking his bedroom door. He deleted his browsing history, Talia noticed. She also noticed that he had stopped sleeping through the night. She would sometimes hear his footsteps at 2 or 3 a.m., pacing the hallway. Once, she found him sitting on the floor of the kitchen, staring at the back door as if waiting for someone to arrive. "You okay?" she had asked. He didn't answer. Later that week, during a meeting with her youth voice mentor, Talia mentioned she wanted to include video documentation in her project. The mentor, an energetic graduate student named Melissa, encouraged her. "Only if you have something solid," she had said. "It has to be firsthand, something people can't ignore." That night, Talia made up her mind. She would find a way to access Jaden's footage, whether he helped her or not. She didn't yet understand what she was stepping into. She just knew her brother was hiding something important, and if he wasn't going to speak, then maybe the camera would. But Jaden wasn't the only one being watched. At school, a security guard named Officer Latham had taken notice of the twins. He had worked at Bishop Freeman for over a decade, and while he rarely interacted with students beyond quick hallway nods, something about Jaden made him uneasy. Latham had seen him filming in the parking lot one afternoon and had reported it to administration. When no disciplinary action followed, he started to follow the boy around campus, subtly at first, then more overtly. "You shouldn't be recording on school property," he told Jaden one day outside the science building. Jaden didn't answer. He just lowered the camera and walked away. Later that evening, he uploaded a new video. No faces, just the shadow of a uniformed man leaning over a student, the camera tilting slightly as if it had been set down on the ground. The caption read, "Some people wear fear like a badge." Talia watched it twice. Then she opened a blank document on her laptop and began to write her speech. Something was happening, something urgent, and she was determined to tell it. What she didn't know was that her brother had already taken it further than she could imagine, and soon the line between observation and exposure would disappear completely. By the time March rolled in, the city had seen 3 police brutality complaints from black youth in the last month alone. None had reached local news, but Jaden knew. He had footage of one arrest. He had filmed it from across the street. Zoomed in, silent, heart pounding. It was all on his hard drive, tucked beneath a pile of socks in his dresser drawer. He didn't know yet that someone else had found out. On a cold Thursday morning, as Daniela left for work, Jaden stood at the front door, camera bag in hand. He glanced back at his sister, who was already halfway down the stairs. "I'll be back before dinner," he said. Talia nodded but didn't speak. The door closed behind him. He would not return. And the silence that followed would shatter everything they thought they understood about truth, safety, and the price of seeing too much. The following days passed in a blur of subtle shifts and whispered tensions, the kind that don't announce themselves, but settle slowly like dust on a forgotten windowsill. Jaden had returned home late that Thursday, not saying much, his shoulders hunched in a way that Talia had never seen before. He went straight to his room, barely acknowledging his mother's voice asking about dinner. The next morning, his eyes were rimmed red, and he didn't speak a word during breakfast. Talia noticed he didn't bring his camera with him when they left for school, which was strange. He never left it behind. She tried asking him about it as they walked to the bus stop, but he brushed her off with a shake of his head and a muttered, "Don't worry about it." That only made her worry more. At school, Talia sat through her classes with restless energy, her foot tapping constantly under her desk. Her mind wasn't on equations or historical timelines, but on the flickers she'd seen on Jaden's screen days earlier. The jarring clarity of conflict, the certainty in his silent perspective. Something in those clips had shifted her, had made her realize just how much more he had been seeing while she had been talking. That evening, when she returned home, Jaden's door was closed. Music played low behind it, something instrumental and tense. She hovered outside for a moment, thinking to knock, then decided against it. Instead, she went to the shared computer in the dining room. If Jaden had uploaded anything recently, it might still be cached in the browser. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as guilt pooled in her stomach, but she overrode it. She needed to know what he was hiding. It didn't take long. A few mistyped URLs and saved logins later, and she was inside his cloud folder. He hadn't secured it, probably assuming no one in the house would dare touch it. But there it was. File after file, labeled only by date. She clicked one. The screen flickered. A hallway, a shouting voice, a blurred hand pushing someone hard against lockers. Then another video. An officer at a gas station yelling at a teenager barely older than them. Jaden's camera caught it from a car window. He didn't zoom in, didn't speak. He just let the image speak for itself. Talia's mouth went dry. She clicked on the most recent upload, dated just 3 nights ago. The screen opened on their own street. A parked cruiser. Jaden's shaky breath audible over the wind. 2 officers were talking to a group of boys, their voices low. One officer, the same neighbor who'd glared at Jaden more than once, stepped closer to the group, and the audio picked up the shift in tone. "You want to keep filming?" The officer snapped at someone off-screen. Jaden's camera didn't flinch. The clip ended. Talia sat back in the chair, the blood rushing in her ears. She knew this wasn't just about school anymore. Jaden was documenting something dangerous, and if she, a straight-A student working on a civic project, had struggled to get people to listen, then his footage, raw and undeniable, was the kind of evidence no administrator or official could ignore. But it was also the kind of thing that could make someone disappear. Later that night, she confronted him. "You're playing with fire," she said, standing in his doorway as he hunched over his desk. The camera was in pieces before him. Lens, battery, data card, like he was preparing it for something final. He didn't look up. "It's already burning." "I saw your files," she admitted. "I saw everything." He finally turned to her, his face hard. "Then you know why I can't stop." "I want to use some of it. For my project," she said carefully, watching his face. "No," he said instantly. "But, no," he repeated louder this time. "You don't understand. This isn't just about school anymore. I have names, places, faces. If I use the wrong clip or someone recognizes something..." He trailed off. For the first time, Talia noticed the fear behind his defiance. "Jaden," she said quietly, "are you in danger?" He didn't answer, but his silence screamed what he wouldn't say. The next day, Jaden skipped school. It wasn't like him. Even when he hated being there, he showed up. Talia covered for him as best she could, lying to teachers and texting him between classes, receiving nothing in return. When she got home, he was already there, sitting on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. His camera bag was missing. "Where were you?" she asked. "Downtown," he said without turning. "Why?" He rubbed his hands together slowly, as if trying to warm something deep beneath the skin. "Because someone has to show what's happening. They're not afraid to do it. I shouldn't be afraid to record it." "You can't change the world by yourself," she said, sitting beside him. "Then help me," he whispered. That was the moment she decided she would. But it wasn't simple. Jaden didn't want to submit his footage to her project. He didn't want to involve her at all. But the next day, he handed her a USB drive with a dozen selected clips and one document, a written statement he had prepared in case something ever happened to him. "I'm trusting you," he said, "but be smart. Don't go to the school. Go bigger." Talia nodded, feeling the weight of his trust settle like a lead vest across her chest. The following weekend, they worked together. Talia transcribed testimonies. Jaden edited the videos. They compiled a portfolio that was stronger than anything the Youth Voice program had ever seen. And then, 3 days before her scheduled presentation, it happened. Jaden came home late again. His shirt was torn, his lip split. He didn't explain. He locked himself in his room, and this time even Talia couldn't get through to him. Daniela, concerned, wanted to call the school, the police, anyone, but Jaden begged her not to. "It'll only make it worse," he said. He stopped sleeping. The bags under his eyes deepened. He jumped at shadows. He carried the camera less and less, like it had become too heavy for him to bear. Talia worried he was unraveling. She tried to reach him, to hold him in place, but he kept slipping through her fingers. Then, on the night of March 15th, he vanished. Daniela called his friends. No one had seen him. She called the school. No leads. By morning, she filed a missing persons report. Police shrugged. "Teenagers run away all the time," they said. But Daniela knew her son, and Talia, who found the empty camera bag under his bed, knew it too. Something had happened. 24 hours later, Jaden's body was found. It was a construction site, fenced off but not secured. He had fallen from the 3rd floor of an unfinished building. The report called it accidental. A misstep, a tragedy. But his camera was missing. His phone was wiped. And his last text, a half-typed message to Talia, read, "If anything..." It stopped there. They buried him 4 days later. Talia didn't cry at the funeral. She sat stone-faced beside her mother, clutching the USB drive in her pocket like a relic. That night, she didn't come down for dinner. Daniela found her in the morning. The note she left was short, her final words quiet. "Don't let them silence us. Let them see." And next to it, her laptop was open. The last file she had uploaded still glowed on the screen. Twin truth, a testimony. Her body was found in the school locker room. They said it was suicide, stress, grief. But Daniela knew better. They had taken her children, and they had thought it would end there. But they didn't know what was coming next. They didn't know what had been left behind. Not just sorrow, evidence. The morning was eerily quiet. A windless calm clung to the street, too still for March. Daniela stood by the kitchen sink, unmoving, her hands submerged in water that had long gone cold. The sky outside was a pale, bruised gray. The clock on the wall ticked with the same cruel steadiness it had kept since Jaden disappeared, since Talia followed him, since the life she had built, however fragile, however precarious, crumbled into dust. In the space of 4 days, her world had folded inward, and now she stood in the shell of it, holding her breath for fear that one more motion would shatter what little remained. Her daughter had been found cold and lifeless in a room no bigger than a closet, the smell of cleaning chemicals still fresh in the air. A janitor had unlocked the door early that morning and screamed so loudly it brought 3 teachers running. Talia had been hanging by her belt, her feet just barely touching the tile. Her note was folded neatly on the bench below. There were no signs of struggle, no signs of hesitation. Except Daniela didn't believe it. Not really. She had seen the file on her daughter's laptop, the one titled Twin Truth, a Testimony. She hadn't opened it, not yet, but she felt its weight. It sat on the hard drive like a heartbeat, waiting for the world to listen. The house, once alive with competing music from upstairs rooms, arguments about cereal, whispered late-night conversations between the twins, was now silent. Death had hollowed it out. It wasn't just grief that filled the air. It was something sharper, something with teeth. The suspicion, the rage, the questions. Daniela didn't know how to explain it, but there was something unfinished. Both her children gone within days of each other, one found in an empty building, the other in a school that prided itself on security and structure. The explanations didn't add up. Jaden had no history of recklessness. Talia was a fighter, determined, outspoken, relentless. Neither of them had ever expressed the kind of hopelessness the police and administrators were now attributing to them. "It's a coincidence," said the officer who delivered the report. "A tragic one." Daniela had listened to him through numb ears, her eyes never leaving the man's holstered gun. She didn't believe in coincidences anymore. The funeral for Talia and Jaden was set for the following Saturday. The school offered to host a memorial on campus, but Daniela refused. She didn't want a ceremony filled with hollow platitudes from staff who had failed to protect them. Instead, she chose a small Baptist church on the south side, one where her mother used to take the twins for Sunday school. The pastor, Reverend Booker, had known her family since before her husband's deployment. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "I'll make space." In the days leading up to the funeral, the neighborhood buzzed with murmurs. Some said Jaden had been mixed up in something he shouldn't have. Others whispered that Talia had taken her own life out of grief. But there were a few, mostly young people, students, the kids who had seen Jaden's quiet watchfulness and Talia's sharp mind in action, who weren't buying the official version. A few of them had already seen clips of Jaden's videos online. The AT Street Frames account, though inactive now, had begun resurfacing in local circles. A thread on Reddit speculated that Jaden had been documenting police misconduct. A grainy screenshot from one of his videos had been shared on Instagram, tagged with the hash Justice for Jaden, But it wasn't until the day of the funeral that everything truly changed. The church was packed. More than 200 people filled the pews, some standing in the back, others clustered outside with phones in hand, listening through the open doors. 2 closed caskets stood at the front, each adorned with a single framed photograph. Jaden, with his camera slung around his neck. Talia, mid-laugh, her hand raised as if to push the photographer away. Daniela sat in the front row, a wall of numbness between her and the rest of the world. Her sister sat beside her, holding her hand, murmuring prayers under her breath. Daniela's eyes were fixed forward, but her mind was elsewhere, wandering through memories of birthday candles and school plays and the way her children had whispered secrets to each other at night, believing she couldn't hear them. Reverend Booker stepped up to the pulpit and began to speak. His voice was low and deliberate, each word shaped with care. We are gathered here not only to mourn the loss of 2 beautiful lives, but to demand that their absence not go unanswered. As he spoke, a young man in a gray hoodie slipped into the church from the side aisle. He looked around, then made his way toward the sound booth in the back corner. No one stopped him. He moved with quiet confidence. A few seconds later, the projector screen behind the pulpit flickered to life. At first, no one noticed. The Reverend continued his speech, his voice rising with emotion. But then, the sound system caught the opening hum of a video file. The microphone cut out. The screen turned black, then filled with the image of Talia sitting in her bedroom, her face lit only by the soft glow of her desk lamp. A ripple moved through the room. She looked into the camera, her voice calm, unwavering. If you're watching this, I'm probably gone. And if I'm gone, then they made sure of it. The room froze. In the back, the Reverend tried to regain control, but the video kept playing. I'm not here to make you cry. I'm here to show you the truth. My brother didn't fall. He didn't run away. He didn't give up. He was silenced, and they thought no one would notice. What followed was a compilation of clips. Jaden's camera work, steady, silent, damning. A white officer screaming at a young black boy. A security guard shoving a student against a locker. A teacher pulling a black girl out of class for talking too loud, while a white student next to her remained untouched. The final clip showed Jaden, his face in partial shadow. They told me not to record, said it was illegal, dangerous. But I'm not the one with power. I just have a lens, and now they're watching me. If something happens to me, don't believe the first thing they tell you. The screen went dark, then silence. It was the kind of silence that feels like a collective breath holding itself in the air, uncertain what to do next. Someone in the back began to cry. Another person stood up and shouted, "Play it again!" Phones were already out, recording, uploading, sharing. Daniela sat frozen. She had not seen the video in full. She had not known her daughter had prepared something so deliberate, so powerful, so irreversible. By the time the funeral ended, the video had been reposted across Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. Within hours, it had gone viral. That night, news vans parked outside the church. By morning, the headline was everywhere. Twins die days apart after exposing local abuse. Family speaks out. But Daniela hadn't spoken yet. She hadn't given interviews, hadn't appeared in front of microphones or cameras. She didn't need to. Her children had spoken for themselves. Still, the questions came. The police department issued a vague statement about ongoing investigations. The school board expressed shock and sadness at the tragedies. But no one answered the fundamental questions. Why was Jaden found at a construction site? Why was Talia alone in a locked room after hours? Why were their claims ignored while they were alive? The video forced a reckoning. People marched, students walked out of class, hashtags multiplied, #Justice for the Twins trended across platforms. A petition to fire Officer Latham gathered over 50,000 signatures in a single day. The city was forced to respond, but none of that changed what Daniela felt when she returned home that night to a house with 2 empty rooms. She moved through it like a ghost, touching the bedspreads, the pencils, the laundry that still smelled like them. In Talia's room, she found another note tucked into the back of her notebook. "Finish what we started." Daniela stared at the words for a long time. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but she would, and now she was no longer alone, because the city was watching, and the silence had been broken. The morning of the funeral dawned with a thick, unmoving stillness, like the world itself was bracing for a truth it wasn't ready to face. The streets were quieter than usual, the sky a dull slate as if even the sun refused to rise fully. Daniela stood by the window of her bedroom watching the slow procession of cars beginning to line the curb outside. She hadn't slept, not properly, since the moment Talia was found. Sleep was no longer a place of rest but a corridor of echoing thoughts and faces that no longer answered when she called. The church had been filled beyond capacity during the memorial service, but today it felt like the city itself had turned out. News had spread quickly in the days since the video played during the joint service, and now the funeral for Talia and Jaden was no longer a private affair. It was a statement, a reckoning. The building swelled with mourners, reporters, students, teachers, activists, strangers who had only known the twins through a 3-minute clip but who now held signs bearing their names. Daniela tried to take comfort in the numbers, in the solidarity, in the outrage that burned across social media, but all she felt was hollow. Inside the church, the air was dense with grief. Every breath, every cough, every creak of the wooden pews seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. 2 caskets, simple, identical, too small, rested at the front, draped in white cloth and surrounded by photographs and flowers. The photos were carefully chosen. One of Jaden, with his camera raised, a quiet smile playing at the corner of his lips. Another of Talia, mid-speech at her 8th grade debate, her eyes alight with purpose. Reverend Booker approached Daniela quietly. His usual warmth had been replaced with a subdued solemnity, not out of indifference, but because he knew there were no words large enough to fill the space her children had left behind. She gave him a slight nod. He understood. He stepped up to the pulpit and waited for the room to still. "We come together today," he began, his voice low and resolute, "not only to lay to rest 2 beautiful, brilliant children of God, but to confront a world that allowed this to happen. We are not here simply to mourn. We are here to remember, to reckon, to rise." The crowd responded with murmurs, some with tears, others with fists clenched in their laps. Daniela sat in the front row, her hands folded tightly over her knees. She didn't want to cry. Not yet. She needed to hold herself together long enough to see this through. Behind her, a group of students from the twins' school sat in matching sweatshirts bearing the logo of the Youth Voice program. Melissa, Talia's mentor, sat among them, her face pale, her expression stunned. She hadn't spoken publicly since the video surfaced, but her presence said enough. In the row beside them, a few teachers sat stiffly, their eyes darting to the cameras stationed discreetly at the back of the sanctuary. The administration had sent a representative, though none of the attendees seemed eager to point them out. Outside, the overflow crowd stood around makeshift speakers and a live screen transmitting the service. Candles were passed from hand to hand. Murals of the twins had already begun appearing on brick walls in neighborhoods across the city, their faces painted in vibrant colors beneath words like truth, resistance, and they saw what we refused to. Halfway through the service, a commotion stirred near the entrance. A young man, barely older than Talia, entered the church, clutching something to his chest. He whispered to an usher, who looked unsure before ultimately nodding and allowing him through. The boy made his way up the side aisle and approached the pulpit, where Reverend Booker paused mid-sentence. The boy turned to the congregation, his hands trembling. "My name is Rashad," he said. "I was friends with Jaden. I wasn't going to say anything, but I can't be quiet anymore." He looked at Daniela, then down at the object in his hands, a black camera scuffed at the edges, familiar and worn. "This is Jaden's," he said, his voice shaking. "He gave it to me the day before he disappeared. Said if anything happened to him, I should give it to someone who'd know what to do." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Daniela stood before she even realized she had moved. Her heart thundered as Rashad walked it to her, placing it gently in her hands like a sacred object. It was heavier than she remembered, not just in weight, but in what it now represented. Reverend Booker placed a hand on her shoulder. "Would you like to say something?" he asked softly. She hesitated. For days she had refused interviews, avoided microphones, turned her face from every lens. But now, with her son's camera in her hands and her daughter's last words echoing in her mind, she stepped forward. She stood at the pulpit and looked out at the sea of eyes, many of them still damp with tears. She didn't need notes. Everything she needed to say was carved into her bones. "My children were not perfect," she began. "They were teenagers. They were loud, stubborn, curious. But they were brave. So much braver than I ever taught them to be." She paused, the silence hanging, then breaking under her next words. "They believed in truth. They believed in the power of telling it, even when it was dangerous. Even when it cost them everything. Jaden documented injustice because he knew silence was a kind of death. Talia spoke out because she knew fear only wins when we stop talking." She held up the camera. "This is how they fought back. With this. Not with weapons, not with hate, but with evidence." She let the silence breathe before continuing. "And now, I ask all of you, what are we going to do with what they left behind?" Someone in the crowd whispered, "Amen." Another said, "Say that." Daniela's voice steadied. "They were not lost to tragedy. They were taken by a system that punishes truth-tellers. They are gone, but they are not silent. Not anymore. We have their words, their work, their message, and we are going to make sure it is seen." The applause didn't erupt. It built, slowly, steadily, like a storm gathering from a single raindrop. People rose to their feet. Outside, the crowd mirrored the movement, their candles held aloft in tribute. After the final prayers were said and the caskets were carried out, Daniela stood beside the gravesites, watching as her children were lowered into the earth. She felt like she was watching herself be buried with them. But as the dirt was gently scattered over their coffins, she looked down at the camera still clutched in her hands and knew that a part of them was still speaking. Later that evening, back at home, Daniela sat in Talia's room. The walls were still covered with photos and affirmations, drawings of future plans, college names written in marker. She placed Jaden's camera on the desk, then reached for Talia's laptop and powered it on. She opened the file titled "Twin Truth, A Testimony Again," but this time she let it play from beginning to end. After it finished, she didn't close the lid. She opened a new document, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to type. It was time to write their story, not the version sanitized for headlines, but the real one. She would write it all. Because the camera was not the only weapon they had left behind. They had left her. And she was not done fighting. The days that followed the funeral blurred into a surreal stream of voices, messages, headlines, and noise. Daniela had never experienced anything like it. One moment she was lowering her children into the ground. The next, her phone was vibrating non-stop with interview requests, condolences from strangers, legal inquiries, and news alerts pinging her children's names across the country. At first, she tried to ignore it, tried to keep herself anchored in the simple, tactile realities of home. Washing a dish, folding a blanket, touching the doorknobs that still held their fingerprints. But reality was no longer confined to the walls of her house. It had spilled out into the streets, the screens, the conversations of millions, and it carried Jaden and Talia with it. The video they had left behind had taken on a life of its own. In the first 48 hours after it played during the funeral service, it was shared over 4 million times. Hashtags like #Justice for the twins, #Say their names, and #CamerasDonTLi dominated social media. People didn't just watch it, they responded. Young people, especially, recognized something raw and undeniable in the footage. The stillness of Jaden's gaze behind the lens, the quiet fury in Talia's words, the unmistakable truth woven into every frame. Daniela watched the phenomenon from the sidelines at first, her grief too fresh, too thick to allow participation. But everywhere she went, their names followed. A mural appeared 3 blocks from her house. Talia painted with her hand raised, Jaden holding a camera that glowed gold against a background of night. Flowers, letters, and candles appeared outside Bishop Freeman Academy, the same school that had failed to protect them. One morning, she opened her front door to find a group of students kneeling on the lawn in silence, each holding a poster with the twins' faces. They didn't ring the bell or say a word. They stayed for 17 minutes, one for each year Jaden and Talia had lived. Then they stood, nodded at her, and left without a sound. The city could no longer pretend it hadn't heard them. A week after the funeral, Daniela sat in front of a local journalist for the first time. The woman, mid-30s and sharp-eyed, had reached out 3 times before Daniela agreed. Her name was Rena Moss, and she had a reputation for investigative work that dug under headlines. She arrived without a camera crew, without a microphone, just a recorder and a notebook. That earned her trust. They were trying to show something, Daniela said, her voice quiet but steady. They didn't want pity. They wanted justice. They wanted people to pay attention. Rena nodded. What do you think they saw that others didn't? Everything, Daniela replied. Everything we've been taught to ignore. The interview aired online and was excerpted on national broadcasts the following day. Her words struck a chord, not because they were eloquent or dramatic, but because they were plain-spoken, undeniable. People listened. For the first time, perhaps in her entire life, Daniela felt seen. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted on city officials. The school board, once silent, held an emergency meeting to address community concerns. Protesters gathered outside the building, chanting the twins' names, holding banners that read, "This is what silence costs." Bishop Freeman Academy released a carefully worded statement expressing sorrow for the loss and a commitment to reviewing internal policies. It rang hollow. The damage was already done. But not all the consequences were shallow. Under growing public scrutiny, the Montgomery Police Department was forced to initiate an internal investigation. A local watchdog group had begun comparing the dates on Jaden's footage with police logs, uncovering discrepancies. One clip, filmed on the corner of 8th and Madison, showed an officer threatening a group of black teens with arrest over suspicious loitering. No such incident was recorded in the official reports. Another clip, grainy but damning, captured an officer shoving Jaden's camera and muttering, "Keep that lens pointed at me again and see what happens." That officer, later identified as Derek Latham, had a record of prior complaints that had never led to disciplinary action. Now, he was suspended pending review. At the same time, new voices emerged. Former students, parents, even a few teachers from Bishop Freeman, who admitted, anonymously at first, that the environment had long been toxic for students of color. They spoke of different expectations, uneven punishment, microaggressions from faculty, and a culture that dismissed complaints as exaggerations. These stories didn't carry the weight of video, but together they formed a chorus, and the country listened. Daniela, though not used to the spotlight, became a reluctant symbol of something much larger. Invitations poured in. School boards wanted her input. Nonprofits offered platforms. Even a cable news network requested a featured documentary. She turned most of them down. But she agreed to speak at a youth-led town hall, organized by the very same Youth Voice program that Talia had once dreamed of presenting at. The event was held in a city auditorium that seated 500. It was filled within minutes. Students, parents, teachers, journalists, all came to hear the woman whose children had turned a city upside down with a camera and a testimony. Daniela took the stage without notes. She wore one of Talia's old bracelets, the beaded one with the words "Be Loud" spelled out in tiny silver letters. "My kids didn't die because they were weak," she began. "They died because they were strong. Too strong for a system that couldn't bear to be seen clearly." The audience was silent. I won't pretend to understand all the reasons this happened, but I know what I've learned, and I know what I've lost, and I know what I've found since. She paused. I've found that truth spreads like fire when you stop trying to smother it. They rose to their feet before she finished speaking. In the following weeks, the City Council introduced a resolution to mandate body cameras for all school security staff and to review the police department's youth engagement policies. A local attorney announced plans to file a civil suit on behalf of the Robinson family. National civil rights organizations expressed support. But not everyone was celebrating. Online backlash swirled in the shadows. Conspiracy theories, accusations that the video was staged, questions about Jaden's editing. Some claimed the twins had fabricated their footage for attention. Others called Daniela an opportunist. Threatening letters arrived unsigned. She changed her phone number and stopped reading comments. But one afternoon, while sorting through a stack of mail, she found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "They made me delete my footage too. I saw what they did. I'm sorry, I was too scared to speak then, but I won't stay silent now." There was no signature, but the handwriting was careful. A high schooler, she guessed, maybe someone from the same school. She placed the note beside the others. She was keeping them all. Every letter, every voice that reached out, every message that bore witness. They were evidence, too. Late at night, when the world quieted, she often returned to Jaden's camera. She kept it on her desk now, plugged into her laptop. There were still clips she hadn't watched, and she wasn't sure she ever would. But sometimes she opened one just to hear his breath behind the lens, just to remember the way he saw the world. Talia's laptop was there too. Her folders, her essays, her outlines for speeches she would never give. Daniela had started compiling them, turning them into something coherent. A book, maybe, a curriculum, something for the next generation to use. Because the virus of truth her children had unleashed was still spreading. Not all viruses are sickness. Some are survival. By early April, spring had crept softly into the city, disguising its arrival with warm rains and the first green leaves curling at the tips of the branches outside Daniela's window. Flowers bloomed along the cracked sidewalks. Children's laughter once again echoed through the alleys, and everything on the surface appeared to move forward. But inside the Robinson house, time still moved slowly, carefully, as if afraid to disturb the weight that hung in every room. Daniela had grown used to silence, not the silence of peace, but the silence of aftermath, the kind that settles after sirens fade and cameras stop flashing. The world around her seemed louder than ever. The momentum sparked by the twins' story had not died. If anything, it had multiplied, becoming more than just a headline or a fleeting cause. It had become a movement. Their names were etched into signs held at marches in cities she'd never visited. Jaden's image, captured mid-frame behind his lens, appeared on buttons, T-shirts, and digital posters. Talia's words were quoted in speeches by student councils and nonprofit leaders. It would have overwhelmed her had it not been for the stillness of her home, her last sanctuary. She had stopped opening her email. Her inbox had turned into a storm of voices, some genuine, some opportunistic, and some vicious. Instead, she poured her energy into the only thing that still felt real, the preservation of her children's memory, but not as relics, not as saints or symbols, as human beings. She wanted the world to remember who they truly were. Talia's too loud laugh at dinner, Jaden's gentle way of lining his shoes by the door, the way they argued over music and homework and who got the bathroom first in the morning. They weren't just martyrs, they were children. She began writing. At first, it was just notes, scraps of memory jotted down in a spiral notebook she found in Jaden's desk drawer. She wrote about his camera, about the way he always sat at the edge of a room, watching. About Talia's hunger for attention, not because she craved praise, but because she wanted to be heard. Then the notes turned into paragraphs, the paragraphs into pages. She would write late into the night, long after the lights in her neighbors' homes had gone out, long after the television anchors had finished their closing remarks. Sometimes she cried while writing. Sometimes she laughed. But always she wrote with purpose. It was a form of resistance. She began calling the project their lens, not only in reference to Jaden's camera, but to the way both of her children had seen the world, with urgency, with clarity, with hope. She didn't want to sanitize their story for public consumption. She didn't want it polished or softened for comfort. She wanted it to be messy, raw, and real. The truth they had fought for deserved nothing less. She shared early drafts with a small circle of trusted people. Rena Moss, the journalist who had first earned her confidence. Melissa, Talia's youth voice mentor, and Mr. Carver, an English teacher at Bishop Freeman, who had quietly reached out with a letter that began, "I failed your daughter, and I want to help make that right." Each of them responded with care, offering feedback, encouragement, and help navigating the publishing world that had suddenly opened its doors to Daniela. But even as she worked on the book, the legal battle loomed closer. The civil suit against the school district and the police department was being prepared with the support of the Equal Justice Foundation. Daniela had been hesitant at first. She didn't want revenge. But the more she saw the footage Jaden had collected, more than 60 hours of clips, some of which even she hadn't dared to view, the more she understood the full extent of what he had tried to expose, and how little the world had done to stop it. Depositions began. Lawyers requested interviews. Internal records were subpoenaed. One by one, truths that had long been buried started to surface. Officer Derek Latham, suspended shortly after the funeral, was revealed to have been the subject of 8 previous complaints, all quietly closed without consequence. The school's disciplinary data showed a pattern of disproportionately harsh punishments for black students, even when controlling for identical offenses. Emails uncovered during the investigation revealed administrators joking about Talia's activist complex and referring to Jaden as that kid with the camera. These revelations made headlines of their own. Daniela read each article with a strange mixture of grief and grim satisfaction. Her children had known the truth all along. Now, finally, others were being forced to see it too. But the most unexpected moment came not from a courtroom or a press release, but from her mailbox. One morning, amid the usual stack of flyers and bills, she found a small padded envelope. No return address. Inside was a flash drive and a folded piece of notebook paper. It read, "I couldn't protect him, but maybe this will help you show the rest." She plugged the flash drive into her laptop, her breath shallow. The folder held a dozen video files. She clicked on the first one. The timestamp was 3 weeks before Jaden's death. It showed a dim hallway in the school's lower level. The footage was shaky, but clear enough. Jaden was there, facing Officer Latham. The audio picked up every word. "You think this is a game?" the officer said, voice low and threatening. "I think this is my right," Jaden replied. "To record, to document." Latham stepped forward, too close. "Delete it, now." Jaden didn't move. "You're gonna wish you had," Latham muttered. The video cut out. The rest of the files showed similar moments: silent confrontations, threats, intimidation, evidence. Daniela wept as she watched them, not just for what they showed, but for the bravery her son had shown in capturing them. He had known the risk. He had faced it anyway. And now someone, likely another student, was helping him speak again, posthumously. She forwarded the videos to her legal team, then uploaded one to a private drive attached to the website she had begun building for Their Lens. The site was modest, just a homepage, a bio, and a space to submit stories. But within days, messages began to pour in. A mother in Detroit wrote, "My daughter saw Talia speak once at a debate meet. She came home and said she wanted to be just like her." A boy in Georgia wrote anonymously, "I'm scared to bring my phone to school, but I still do. I keep thinking, what if I catch something too?" A teacher in Baltimore said, "I played your son's video in class. We didn't talk for 10 minutes afterward. There was nothing left to say." Each story added weight. Not a burden, but ballast. Something steadying. Something real. One night, as she was sorting submissions, Daniela paused and opened a voice memo app on her phone. She had begun recording herself sometimes, rambling thoughts, stories, things she didn't want to forget. She pressed record and whispered, "You're still here. I know it. And I'm not done yet." Then she placed the phone beside Jaden's camera, which still sat on the desk. A relic, a weapon, a reminder. There were still battles ahead. The lawsuit would take months, maybe years. The school district had already hired high-profile attorneys. The police union issued statements questioning the legitimacy of the footage. The state education board began reviewing the charter of Bishop Freeman Academy. There would be politics, resistance, denial. But Daniela was not afraid anymore. She had her children's memory, she had their voices, and she had the truth. And truth, once spoken, does not go quiet again. It had been nearly a year. The seasons had cycled through their slow, deliberate transformations, from the heavy rains of spring to the smothering heat of summer, the burnt oranges of autumn to the soft gray slush of winter. And now, once again, the early buds of April emerged, uncertain but insistent. The world moved on, as it always did. But for Daniela Robinson, time didn't march forward anymore. It unfolded in quiet revolutions, the kind you could only measure by the way a house began to breathe again, by the soft hum of life returning to corners once silent. The Robinson home was no longer a mausoleum. It would never be what it was, not truly, but it had changed, slowly, patiently. It had learned how to hold light again. There were still mornings when Daniela opened her eyes and forgot, just for a second, that they were gone. The illusion lasted only a breath, sometimes less, but it was long enough to hurt. And yet, she no longer feared that pain. She welcomed it. It reminded her of who she was. It reminded her of who they had been. Jaden and Talia were still everywhere. Their photos remained in the hallway, not staged or perfectly aligned, but real, goofy, unfiltered snapshots of childhood. Ice cream-smeared faces, paint-stained fingers, the two of them laughing so hard one of them had fallen out of frame. Their rooms, once preserved like shrines, had been gently transformed. Talia's desk was now Daniela's writing space. Jaden's shelves, once stacked with memory cards and sketchbooks, now held rows of donated cameras, labeled and cataloged, ready to be distributed to students across the state. It was part of a new initiative she had launched 6 months earlier, called Lens Forward, a program for youth in marginalized communities to learn media literacy, storytelling, and journalism. Not to turn them all into filmmakers, but to give them what her son had fought for: the power to witness, to record, to matter. It had started with just one school, a middle school in Mobile. A teacher there had reached out after reading her book, Their Lens, Stories My Children Died Telling. He asked if she would visit. She did. The classroom was small, the air hot with spring humidity, but the eyes that met hers were wide and attentive. She told them about Jaden, about Talia, about courage, not in loud words, but in the quiet, steady ones that come when grief has been given purpose. After that, the calls multiplied. Now, the program had reached 12 schools, with more on the wait list. Grants had followed. Volunteers, too. Melissa helped coordinate workshops. Rena Moss produced a short film about the movement, which was shortlisted for a National Journalism Award, and Mr. Carver had left Bishop Freeman and now worked full-time developing curriculum for Lens Forward, dedicating himself to building classrooms where students didn't have to fight to be heard. But the greatest change had not come through institutions or headlines. It came in the form of a tree. On the first anniversary of the twins' funeral, Daniela had gathered a small group of friends, former classmates, and community members in her backyard. The garden had once been overgrown and forgotten, but over the past year, she had tended it with the same care she had once given to bedtime stories and lunchbox notes. She cleared the weeds, restored the soil, and carved out a circle in the center. There, she planted a tree. Not just any tree. A tall, strong red oak, one known for its longevity, its resistance to storms, its roots that dig deep and hold. She named it the Witness. Beneath it, a small stone plaque read, Talia and Jaden Robinson. Truth never dies. It takes root. As she dug the hole and lowered the sapling into the earth, she felt something shift. Not release, not closure. She didn't believe in those words anymore, but she felt continuity. That was enough. After the planting, the guests gathered in folding chairs. A student from the Lens Forward program read a poem he had written, inspired by Jaden's footage. Another shared a speech they had given in their own school, citing Talia's advocacy as their starting point. Daniela listened, tears running freely, not from sadness, but from awe. These weren't echoes, these were new voices, and they weren't whispering, they were shouting. Later that evening, she sat beneath the new tree, barefoot in the grass, and opened her laptop. She hadn't checked the site submissions in a few days. The inbox was full. She scrolled slowly, reading notes from teenagers, mothers, teachers, a retired police officer who admitted he'd looked the other way too many times. Each message was a seed. Not all would grow, but some would, and that, she now believed, was how change happened. Her phone buzzed beside her. It was a text from Rashad, the boy who had brought Jaden's camera to the funeral. He had graduated and gotten a scholarship to study digital media at Howard University. He was building a documentary project inspired by Jaden's life. The message simply said, "Starting filming tomorrow." Just wanted to say thank you. I wouldn't be doing this if not for him. She smiled. Daniela closed the laptop and looked up. The sky was a deep indigo now, stars beginning to poke through like shy children peering around corners. The wind moved gently through the leaves above, a soft rustle like a voice just beyond understanding. She didn't try to name it. She didn't need to. The next day, she attended a city council meeting. It had taken nearly a year, but the civil case was coming to a close. The police department had settled quietly. The school had agreed to independent oversight. But, more than that, policy reforms had begun. A new racial equity board was established. Anonymous reporting systems had been implemented in schools. Funding had increased for youth media programs. When she spoke at the meeting, she didn't dwell on the past. She didn't name names or read prepared statements. She spoke about future children, about those still learning to find their voice, about the power of memory not just as a record, but as a tool, a force, a weapon against erasure. Afterward, a council member approached her and said, "Your children changed this city." Daniela nodded, but her response was quiet. "They changed me first." She went home that evening and walked through the house slowly. In the hallway, a framed print of one of Jaden's photos hung, just a shadow cast across the pavement, 2 feet caught mid-step. She stared at it for a long time. It was simple, imperfect, but it had perspective. It had truth, and it had movement. Talia's old journal was now filled with notes from students across the country. Each time Daniela visited a school, she brought it with her, asking one person to write something inside, a reflection, a dream, a question. The journal had become something sacred, passed hand to hand, page to page, voice to voice. One entry read, "I don't know what I want to be yet, but I know I want to matter." Another said, "I never thought my story mattered until I saw theirs. Now I won't stop telling it." Daniela added a note of her own at the end. "You matter, all of you, and we will never stop watching, never stop listening, never stop growing. She closed the journal, placed it beside Jaden's camera and Talia's bracelet, and turned off the light. The house didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Outside, the oak tree swayed, its roots stretching deeper into the soil. And somewhere in the distance, on a sidewalk, in a classroom, behind a lens, a child raised their voice for the first time and was heard. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories. Make sure to watch the next video to see how far the fight for truth can go. And please, share this video, because some stories deserve to be heard by everyone.